Hello folks, and welcome to the OceanState Cuisine. For today's recipe, we're going to be making eggplant parmesan. This is awesome. What I'm going to be making with my eggplant parmesan today is sandwiches, which is going to be served in a hoagie roll, sub roll / grinder. Back home, we used to call sandwiches that are made in sub rolls grinders. But first, let's go over the ingredients that we're going to be using in today's recipe. In the front on the cutting board, we have one large eggplant. Next to the eggplant on the right side is some flour. Then in the back row, starting on the left-hand side, we have some dried garlic or garlic powder. Next to the garlic powder, we have some black pepper. Then next to the black pepper, we have some basil. Now, for the way that I'm making this, dry basil is the basil you want to use for today's recipe. The reason why is if you went to use fresh basil, the moisture in the fresh basil may clump up the flour mixture. You could also even use Italian seasoning. I didn't have any at this time. Then next to that, we have some salt. And then next to the salt, we have 2 large eggs and some milk. And then lastly, we have some fine Italian breadcrumbs. These come pre-seasoned. Now, one of the main stars to the show today, I did not put in the picture. I totally forgot. So we need some Parmesan cheese, grated dry Parmesan cheese for this. Now let's start putting this all together. Now here's our eggplant and the cutting board. So now to cut this up, I like to slice this as thin as possible. Now the direction you see me slicing this right now to remove the ends is the way that most people will slice up the whole eggplant. But seeing this is going in torpedo rolls or sub rolls, which are pretty long rolls, I decided to actually cut this lengthwise. But now some people will leave the skin on. It's not a big deal, but sometimes the skin can give a bit of flavor to the eggplant. So I decided on removing mine. So we're going to look at a few different methods of how to remove this skin. So first, I'm using a serrated edge knife. It's doing a pretty good job, but I want to speed it up a bit. So I broke out some of my vegetable peelers. And we're going to see which one actually does the best job for this. So the one that I'm using right now ultimately sucks. We could see it's not even scratching it. But this one is fantastic. So this is the one that I highly advise for peeling your eggplant. I call it the wishbone peeler because it's kind of shaped like a wishbone. And it's going right through this peel. It's doing a great job. Now, just like an apple, an eggplant, once it's left out in the air, once the peel is removed, will start turning brown. If it starts turning a little bit brown, that's not a big deal. And then once we get most of the skin off, as we see right here, if there's a couple little pieces left on it, it's no big deal. So now, as I said earlier, most people will cut it in this direction, just like this. But again, I think it makes a lot more sense, and I want to thank my Auntie Ann for actually giving me this piece of advice. She says, cut it lengthwise, because that's the length of your torpedo roll. Now, if you're making eggplant parmesan for pasta dishes or anything else, then you just slice it whichever way you want. Now, the secret here with eggplant is you want to try to cut it as thin as possible, because what you want to do is you want to actually get your eggplant to dry out a bit. Now, as we see, cutting it lengthways, we are still getting quite a few slices. So this is going to be able to yield you a good amount of sandwiches. Another advantage of removing the skin too is when it comes to slicing it, and I am using a serrated edge, is that when the skin's on it, it can make it a little more slick. So a lot of times your knife blade will start sliding. Without the skin, we could see that the knife has a better chance of gripping onto that eggplant. Let's speed things up a bit. When you get to the end, I know it's tough to hold on to it. You can use that last piece for something else or try using a fork. Now next, I have a cookie sheet and I lined it with some wax paper. And on top of the wax paper, I have a few wire racks. And I'm going to lay out my slices now on these wire racks. The reason for this is so that it dries out a bit. The drier you get your eggplant, the better it will be in the long run. Of course, it will soften back up once we add the tomato sauce later on. But again, it makes it where your eggplant won't taste as flubbery or have the consistency of that. Now, while I'm laying these out, I'm going to explain something about salt. Now, when it comes to salt, salt is something that pulls out moisture out of anything. Even animal hides, they preserve it first by adding salt once the hide is cleaned. It's moisture in food that actually makes it rot over time. This is why on journeys, back in the old days, they started making beef jerky because it would last a lot longer. So now I'm just using regular table salt here to help with the dehydration process. And we are going to be doing both sides. Now salt, believe it or not, the most powerful salt is table salt. So when it comes to a process like this, if you have coarse salt like sea salt, cooking rock salt, any kind of salts like that is actually better for this process. Kosher salt is also a really good one. Now, even though I am salting both sides of my eggplant, it did not taste salty at all in the final product. Just watch out that no matter what kind of salt that you use, that you don't overdo it. You don't need tons and tons of salt to see the moisture come to the surface later. So just a light sprinkle on both sides should work fine enough. So now I'm just going to let these sit now just like that for about an hour. You could let them sit even longer if you want to, and then the salt's going to help it from turning brown. Now next we're going to work on our flour mixture, so I'm going to add some basil now. And again, I'm using dried basil here. We want to try to keep all of our ingredients dry. And then next, in goes the black pepper cap. I'm only kidding. Alright, so we want to hit this now with some fresh ground black pepper. And just mix it around like that. There we go. I just shuffle it around the plate. And we're going to give it a nice douse of black pepper. And then what is Italian food without garlic? So for this, again, we want to keep it dry, so we're using garlic powder. And then with a spoon, I'm just using a teaspoon here, I'm just going to mix this, stir this all around to incorporate all the seasonings along with the flour. Just like that. And then next, just getting off the lid here, we're going to add about equals amount of the fine breadcrumbs. I like mixing a lot of times when I make dishes like this, both flour and breadcrumbs. The breadcrumbs will give it a bit of a crunch. The reason why I'm using fine breadcrumbs instead of panko is because the fine breadcrumbs coats the eggplant a little more evenly. But you can use either or. Just keep in mind most panko breadcrumbs does not come seasoned. So if you were to use panko, add it to the flour first and then season both of them all at the same time. And then I decided to add some Parmesan cheese right here to the flour mixture, and then we're going to stir that up to mix it well. Now this is not the reason why it's called Eggplant Parmesan. We will see why it's called Eggplant Parmesan a little later in the video. Now about an hour's passed now, we're going to get the eggplant. I'm going to blot it on this paper towel, and we're going to see that moisture. See the moisture on the paper towel? So the salt does help when it comes to this. I actually even know of people that will do this, but they'll put the eggplant in like a real large bowl and put another smaller bowl inside as a weight to push out that moisture. But I like using the wire rack because the air gets at it. So we could see that there's quite a bit of moisture coming out of this eggplant for only sitting for about an hour. Another advantage too of removing some of the moisture is now it's going to absorb the seasonings better because it's got empty molecules now. It's not as full of fluids as it once was. Cooking is a bit of a science. Now here we have our milk and our egg mixture. And again, I use 2 large eggs and probably about like 3 tablespoons worth of milk. And then I just whisked it up. I'm pretty sure that we all know how to do this procedure right here. Now next, it's time to assemble our eggplant with the mixture and then add it to our deep fryer. A lot of people will just use a large saute pan or frying pan with a little bit of oil at the bottom, maybe about 1/4 of an inch, and do it that way, but I like using a fryer later. It's a lot safer, and you don't have to worry about it breaking down later on or turning brown. Or I should say burning. So we're going to run it through the egg solution first, and then we're going to put it into the flour and breadcrumb seasoned mixture. And we're going to do a few at a time before we end up adding it to the fryer later. And in my fryer later, I'm not going to use any fry baskets. I'm just going to let them float freely in the oil. So if you are using a fryer later, make sure it's preheating on about 350 to 360 Fahrenheit. These are thin and they cook rather quickly. So again, we're just going to keep dredging all of our slices, batch at a time. Now our oil is ready. We're going to start adding this to the fryer later. We're going to fry it on each side for a couple of minutes. And then with some tongs, we're going to flip them over. So about 2 to 3 minutes per side. And yes, this fryer later is getting a wicked bath right after this session. So anyways, now I'm going to drain them on some paper towel on a plate. And then we are going to repeat this process until we cooked up all of our sliced eggplant. I want you guys to hear the sound of this when I scrape it. It's like a potato chip. This is what you want. So again, that was the total of about 4 to 5 minutes, a couple of minutes on each side, but go by the color. You want it to be nice and brown like we see here. Now, while it's still hot with the oil, I'm going to sprinkle some salt on both sides. When you're frying something, it's always best to salt as soon as you take it out of the oil because the salt will really stick to it. Now I'm going to transfer it onto a solid plate here. And as the other eggplant finishes cooking, we're going to keep making layers just like we're making right now until we complete all of our eggplant. But first, before adding the second layer, now we want to add some tomato sauce to this. So I'm just using a marinara here, and I just heated it up a bit because I'm getting ready to make a sandwich soon. But now if you're not going to be eating this right away, you can use cold sauce like out of a jar, and then you could heat up the individual servings as you need it. So kind of like the lasagna method where you work with layers, we're doing the same with our eggplant. We're just going to add the tomato sauce just like we see right here. I'll be truthfully honest with you, I love eggplant when it first comes out of the fryer later, when it's nice and crunchy and crispy. But the tomato sauce, of course, is going to soften it back up, but it still leaves a very nice texture because we dried out the eggplant using some of the salt earlier. And plus, adding the breadcrumb to the flour mixture helps with that crunch. Now, this is the main reason why it's called Eggplant Parmesan, because after adding the sauce, we're now going to give it a nice sprinkle of Parmesan cheese in between each layer. Man, I'm already getting hungry. Just as we see right here. That's perfect. And then again, we just rinse and repeat until we do the same with all of our eggplant. And there we are with all of our eggplant. And of course, we topped it off again with the tomato sauce and the Parmesan cheese. Serve it in a nice grilled roll like we just see right there, nice hoagie grinder. Brown it up a bit. I use maybe about 2 to 3 slices of eggplant per sandwich. This is probably one of the most true Italian authentic sandwiches you could possibly make. I'd actually take this over a meatball. And then for added flavors and goodness, I added a slice of provolone cheese between the eggplant and the bread. So there we have it, folks. There's my version of my eggplant parmesan sandwich style. And by all means, you could use the other methods too. You could just eat it out of a dish with a nice slice of bread on the side. I also make a stuffed eggplant every now and then. It's similar to stuffed peppers. So maybe sometime soon I will come out with a video of how to make my stuffed eggplant. And that's it, folks, for today's video. Thanks for stopping by and checking out the OceanState Cuisine. Feel free to sub up to support the channel and more awesome videos coming your way. Comment down below because as always we love to hear from you. Give this meal a shot. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Take care. Bye-bye.